Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and welcome back to another episode of the MTG Stock Market, the video series where we are tracking prices and trends of Magic the Gathering cards across various formats. So today we're mainly going to be talking about Standard, and with Standard, we just recently had a GP, which kind of threw a wrench into the way that the format was actually structured and the way people are actually conducting deck building and sideboarding from here on out. So with this, we are going to be talking about a top 5 in price trends going upwards. So for that, this week we have Mastery of the Unseen, See the Unwritten, Salsa God of the Sea, Whisperwood Elemental yet again, and Master of Waves. So sitting in our number 1 slot here, we have our Mastery of the Unseen at $3.95 with a 260% increase of $2.85. Now, I don't think anybody really expected to see this card, and Grand Prix Miami definitely changed the way that the format was actually being interpreted and what was deemed playable at that point in time. So Green-White Devotion is now playing Mastery of the Unseen. There is Splashing White as well for like Fleecemane Lion, but Mastery of the Unseen was definitely the most intriguing and interesting tech that they could possibly have for Devotion. It allows the deck to be able to play at an instant speed and manifest off the top of their library, and of course, because you're playing a Devotion deck, you're able to generate a massive amount of mana and actually have something to do with it, and in this case, that is actually manifesting a creature and then being able to flip it face up. But the interesting thing about Mastery of the Unseen is just that it interacts well with your Whisperwood Elemental, so you're able to manifest more on top of what your Whisperwood is actually manifesting as well. And at that point, you're creating a huge board state that is most times very hard to deal with, even whenever your opponent has end hostilities, because you can just sack a Whisperwood if you have one, and then you're manifesting again for your face-up creatures that you actually have. But another interesting thing to note about Mastery of the Unseen and Manifest in general, as far as Devotion is concerned, is that Ugin doesn't really do much to your face-down cards, because Ugin is only going to be hitting colored permanents. So with Ugin, you're able to bypass any wrath effects that Ugin could actually have for that quote-unquote all-is-dust effect that Ugin actually has, and you're able to play much more I guess, aggressively and much more horizontal as far as how your board state is actually going to stack, because you're playing cards like Mastery of the Unseen and Whisperwood Elemental within Green-White Devotion. So interestingly enough, in our number 2 spot here, we have See the Unwritten, which is up to $3.95 with a 127% increase of $2.21. So it's really interesting that See the Unwritten is as expensive as Mastery of the Unseen now, but something else that's interesting about this card is it didn't see as much play as Mastery of the Unseen. Quite the opposite, actually. It didn't really make any strong presence or significance in the meta as far as these past few weeks have gone. However, I think people are actually starting to catch on that this is a really good card like Whisperwood Elemental. It's not quite in the same ballpark as far as being able to do as much as Whisperwood Elemental can. However, it was something in the previous episodes that I mentioned that this card can eventually end up being really good, just because if the Devotion decks stick around and people are manipulating and are trying to just jam as many things as they can with their Devotion and things that also give synergy towards that whole Devotion scheme, See the Unwritten definitely has the potential for actually being playable. You're looking at 8 cards whenever you cast it for 6 if it resolves. And if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you're getting 2 creatures instead of 1, which against any fair deck, if they're not playing any wrath effects or anything like that, and especially if they're just using 1-for-1 removal, being able to grab 2 creatures from your top 8 cards that you're looking at is really, really powerful. So I'm not really surprised to see the Unwritten go up. However, it is interesting that it's going up now when it hasn't had a huge influx of people actually gravitating towards the card and jamming it into their decks. My justification would be for this card that people are just trying to ride the whole Devotion train right now, and with that, this is one of those cards that just plays into the archetype very well, and people definitely are going to try and brew with it. So, sitting in our number 3 slot, we have Salsa God of the Sea up to $8 with a 30% increase of $1.85. So, why is Thassa going up? Why is Devotion just such a huge thing right now? Well, they spoiled Shorecrasher Elemental for Dragons of Tarkir. It's a 3/3 for triple blue, which immediately had everybody flocking to it. But the other abilities of the card are actually pretty good. So for 1 blue, the Shorecrasher can exile itself and return to the battlefield face down. For 1 colorless, it can get +1, -1, or -1, +1, your choice. And it has a lot of different modes of power and toughness that it can actually be at. And it can also megamorph. So whenever it's face down, if you morph it face up for 5, it's going to have an additional +1/+1 counter, which is kind of redundant because if you go to exile it again, it loses the counter whenever it comes in morphed face down again. However, that's not the point. The fact that the card can protect itself whenever it's face up from a removal forces your opponent to have to use a whole lot more removal on your guys. And it's actually just really good at allowing your opponent not to be able to 1-for-1 trade. But enough talking about Shorecrasher Elemental. We're going to talk about him later with Master of Waves. With Thassa, with the Blue Devotion decks getting a lot of hype right now, people are going to be looking for things that interact with Blue Devotion, and Thassa has proven to be just a really good use of that. Whenever you have a ton of mana, you can give your dudes unblockable for the turn, which is just really, really powerful. And also being able to scry is nothing short of amazing every single turn. In our number 4 slot, we have our Whisperwood Elemental up to $14.16 with a 13% increase of $1.66. So this guy just keeps on climbing up. The Green Devotion decks are absolutely nothing to laugh about. They're actually really good. They do have some bad matchups, like, of course, if you're playing against End Hostilities and you don't have Whisperwood Elemental, you are going to be punished for overextending on your board. And even around the End Hostilities, if your opponent has a way to, at an instant speed, kill your Whisperwood Elemental and then End Hostilities during their turn, you are still a little bit weak to their actual removal as it is. I think with Whisperwood Elemental going up, Devotion going up as well, something to keep note of is actually just going to be Perilous Vault. So the more that Mastery of the Unseen and Whisperwood Elemental get played, the more likely decks are going to try to gravitate towards playing Control, and people are going to just start jamming cards like Perilous Vault because it wraths the entire board. It has overlap for the matchups like Abzan Control, so you can get rid of things like Ugin and anything in between, their Elspeths, Sorns if they're playing them, Nisas, stuff like that. Just being able to wrath the board with Perilous Vault is really, really good, and it gets around Whisperwood Elemental very easily, and even the Manifest tokens that your opponent's making as well. So Whisperwood still going up, but people are going to try to find ways to get around that. And last but definitely not least, we have our Master of Waves up to $7.10 with a 27% increase of $1.52. So for the week, this Master of Waves is definitely going up. So one interesting thing to note with Master of Waves as far as the Shorecrasher Elemental is concerned is that Master of Waves is a lord for elementals, and something to remember is that your Shorecrasher Elemental is certainly a elemental as well. So Master of Waves actually turns your Shorecrasher Elemental into a 4/4, thus allowing it to pump itself a little bit more for its 1 colorless ability. So whenever it comes down to you making the Shorecrasher unblockable and you know your opponent doesn't have removal for whatever you're doing, you're able to get in for a whole lot more with that Shorecrasher and just keep on pounding your opponent for a lot of damage, just based on having that +1/+1, even outside of the tokens that you make off of the Master of Waves itself. So if you have the awkward sequencing where you play Master Waves first, don't get too much value, and then you play Shorecrasher, at least your Shorecrasher is going to be a little bit bigger and much more resilient and difficult to actually deal with. As a closing note for this episode, rather than doing a discussion on cards that are going down, because a lot of cards are going to be going down in price right now, that's naturally just what happens as far as set releases and pre-releases go with Magic sets. Whenever people start to get all hyped up about cards and new things that are getting released, some cards are going to go up because people see these interactions and synergies. But for the most part, outside of those synergies and those very narrow things that people have in their mind that they may or may not be playtesting at this given point in time, a lot of cards are going to be going down in price. And it's really difficult to say which card is going to go down more in price than the others, just because people are going to favor certain things over others. Demand for the bulk majority of the current standard sets is just going to keep on going down. And for the most part, people are just going to have their focus shifted way much more on Dragons of Tarkir than anything else. With this, what I'm actually segueing into is that if you're planning on playing these decks like Mono Blue Devotion and stuff like that, keep in mind that it's very fair game that people are going to just be building decks to beat you. With that, I mean, there are already very proven decks in the format that are just going to be really good next standard without a doubt. Decks like Abzan. Abzan is just a huge force within the standard format. It's very consistent in what it does. It has all the answers in the colors for what it actually needs to do and the cards that it needs to stop. And with this, we're just kind of preying on the decks that don't really know what they're doing yet, or don't know what the perfect combination of certain X amount of cards and in what quantities they actually need to have. With this, I mean, cards like Ultimate Price and Sultai Charm just become so much better because with Sultai Charm, now the Green-White Devotion is more of a deck and is like an actual thing in the format that people need to worry about. It becomes better because you have the mode to deal with Mastery of the Unseen, but at the same time, you have the overlap to kill cards like Shore Crasher, Elemental, and eventually like Master Waves as well. And you also have the weird overlap for any of the other monocolored creatures within the format that you actually want to be able to hit. The same thing goes with Ultimate Price. Now, it's a little bit more narrow. The implications aren't really the greatest for every single matchup. If you're playing against a deck that's playing like Tasigur, Courser, and Siege Rhino as its main creatures, it's not really the most optimal card to have, just because, sure, you can hit their Tasigur and their Courser. You can't hit their Siege Rhino, and if that's what they see, and you're both in top deck mode, and they just keep on top decking Rhinos while you're top decking Ultimate Prices, you're obviously getting nowhere. But with this, cards like Ultimate Price that are very narrow and precise on what they're actually trying to hit are going to become much better. Something that's also kind of interesting to note about the format is that Duress got reprinted, so now we're in this really, really weird place in the standard format where we have Thoughtseize, Duress, and Despise all legal. So those are 12 cards that you could be playing, hypothetically, in your main board to just pick away at what your opponent's trying to do. Now, all of these aren't extremely playable. Of course, Despise is definitely much less playable as far as Thoughtseize is concerned, and trying to compare the two cards, sure, you lose life off of Thoughtseize, but Thoughtseize does also hit a lot more for you. The same thing can be said with Duress. It's more narrow. It has the specific decks that you actually want to be siding it in against. And I very strictly use the word siding because you're not really going to be pre-sideboarding 12 discard spells unless you're playing a like 8-rack deck or something like that. But it's just something interesting to note that Duress, Despise, and your Thoughtseize are all in the same format. So I think there's going to be this very weird rock, paper, scissors type situation going on with decks that are trying to play synergy, decks that are playing fair, and control decks that are just trying to beat the overlap, where you're going to have these decks that are just going to be playing stuff like Abzan, and they have removal for the Mono Blue Devotion decks and stuff like that. And I keep on saying Mono Blue Devotion, where it could just easily be like Mono Green or Green White Devotion as well. But I keep on highlighting Mono Blue just because of the hype that is clearly behind it. But my point being here is that you're going to have these decks like Abzan that are going to be perfectly content with what they're actually playing already, that are just going to get a few new cards like Ultimate Price and Duress that they're going to be able to play within the format. And they're just going to have the outs for the cards like Shore Crasher, Elemental, and Master Waves and stuff like that, while also having removal for decks like Green-White Devotion as far as Ultimate Price is concerned. But then they also have like Duress for the control decks, because control may be trying to stop Mono Blue from ever being a fun and cool thing to actually do within the standard format. So I think it is perfectly conceivable to think that there is going to be this kind of weird rock, paper, scissors type thing going on with people that are content with what they're trying to do, people that are trying to play cool synergies, and people that are exclusively trying to stop those cool synergies. But that is about enough rambling as far as Standard is concerned, and trying to predict metas and try to figure out what's actually playable and where things are actually going to lie in the next few weeks upcoming here. It's been a very lengthy episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, I would appreciate it if you thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. And until next time, guys, thank you for watching, and peace out.